The first time my brother laughed at my Navy career, I let it go. The second time I smiled. The 100th time I realized he wasn't really laughing at my job. He was laughing because he thought he had already measured my worth. "You spent 30 years taking orders," Daniel said as he raised his glass. "Meanwhile, I built something that actually matters." A few relatives chuckled. Someone looked away. My father nodded without saying a word. I didn't argue. I simply glanced at my watch. "I have to leave," I said quietly. Daniel smirked. "Sure, don't let those paperwork emergencies keep you too busy." I picked up my coat, thanked my mother for dinner, and walked toward the front door. 25 minutes later, more than 200 Navy SEALs would rise to their feet the moment I entered a hall. A commander would call out, "Admiral on deck," and for the first time in our lives, my brother would understand just how little he had ever known about me. I have often wondered when my family stopped seeing me. Not looking at me that happened every holiday, but truly seeing me. Maybe it happened the day I left our hometown at 19 with a single duffel bag and an appointment to begin officer training. Maybe it happened because I missed birthdays, anniversaries, and backyard barbecues while serving overseas. Or maybe it happened because I never learned how to tell stories about myself. People usually fill silence with assumptions. My family certainly did. My name is Victoria Hale. I have served in the United States Navy for 33 years. By the time this story began, I had spent most of the previous decade in Washington, D.C., assigned to responsibilities I couldn't discuss outside secure rooms. Classified work has a strange effect on relationships. Friends stop asking questions after a while. Family members invent their own answers. According to my brother Daniel, I pushed paperwork. According to my father, I had become some kind of government administrator. According to my nieces and nephews, I probably sat behind a computer all day. I never corrected any of them. Not because I enjoyed being underestimated, because I had signed my name beneath promises that mattered more than winning family arguments. I grew up in a small Virginia town where success was measured in visible things. Bigger trucks, bigger houses, bigger paychecks. My father had spent 40 years running a construction company he built with his own hands. I respected that. Nobody could accuse him of avoiding hard work. The problem was that he believed every meaningful achievement had to be seen. Military service didn't fit that definition. "You disappear for months," he once told me. "Then you come back and can't tell anybody what you've been doing. How's anyone supposed to appreciate that?" I remember answering with a smile. "They're not supposed to." He shook his head as though I had confirmed every suspicion he had ever held. Daniel inherited more than my father's business instincts. He inherited his certainty. 3 years older than me, Daniel had never met a room he didn't want to dominate. He spoke loudly, laughed loudly, and somehow managed to turn every conversation back toward himself. He wasn't a bad man. That would have made life simpler. He coached youth baseball. He visited our mother every Sunday. He donated to local charities. He simply believed that the world naturally sorted people into winners and everyone else. Since he owned several successful home improvement companies, he assumed he belonged in the first category. As far as he was concerned, I had chosen the second. Whenever I came home on leave, he found ways to remind me. So, he'd ask across the dinner table, still taking orders, or, "You ever think about getting a real executive job?" Everyone laughed because it sounded harmless. I laughed too. It was easier. The invitation to my father's 70th birthday arrived 6 weeks before the celebration. Family only. Formal dinner. No excuses. I almost declined. Not because I didn't love my parents. Because I already knew exactly how the evening would unfold. Daniel would tell stories about business deals. Dad would beam with pride. Someone would ask me where I had been stationed. I'd answer with something intentionally vague. The conversation would drift back to Daniel before dessert. Still, 70 years is a milestone. So I went. I drove down from Washington early that morning instead of flying. The highway gave me time to think. The closer I came to home, the more familiar everything looked. The gas station where I bought my first car. The diner where Mom used to order pancakes after church. The little baseball field where Daniel hit his first home run. Some memories soften with age. Others simply become quieter. When I reached my parents' house, pickup trucks already lined both sides of the driveway. Children ran across the yard. Someone had music playing through old outdoor speakers. The smell of grilled steaks drifted through the warm spring air. For just a moment, everything felt normal. Mom hugged me the instant she saw me. "Oh, sweetheart, you made it. I wouldn't miss Dad's birthday." She smiled, though there was tiredness around her eyes. Planning large family gatherings had become harder over the years. Inside relatives filled every room. Conversations overlapped. Laughter echoed from the kitchen. Nobody noticed that I had arrived until Daniel spotted me. There she is. Every head turned. He walked over with his arms spread wide before giving me a quick hug. "You still alive? We figured the Pentagon chained you to a desk." A few cousins laughed. "So far so good," I answered. He looked me up and down. Civilian clothes, simple navy blazer. No jewelry except my wedding ring, which I still wore years after losing my husband to cancer because I wasn't ready to take it off. "You don't even look military anymore," Daniel joked. "I'll take that as a compliment." Dad finally appeared from the dining room. He hugged me warmly. But within seconds, Daniel was already showing him photos of a commercial project his company had just completed. I stepped aside. Old habits. Nobody asked me what I had been working on. Nobody asked whether I was happy. As the afternoon rolled into evening, the stories grew louder. Daniel talked about profits, contracts, expansion. He had everyone's attention. I watched my father listening with unmistakable pride. Part of me was genuinely glad. Another part quietly wondered what it might feel like to have him look at me that way. After dinner, someone suggested a toast. Daniel stood first. He praised Dad. He praised family. He praised hard work. Then his eyes found me. "And let's raise a glass for Victoria, too," he said with a grin that immediately warned me where he was headed. "She's spent 30-plus years in the Navy." He paused just long enough. "No offense, sis, but honestly," he shrugged. "No one really cares about your Navy career." The room went silent for half a heartbeat. Then a few uncomfortable laughs escaped. Dad didn't correct him. He simply looked down at his drink. I felt the familiar sting. Not because Daniel had embarrassed me. Because nobody seemed surprised that he had. I reached into my jacket pocket. My phone vibrated once. The message contained only 4 words. "Ma'am, we're ready whenever you are." I looked at the time. The ceremony would begin in less than an hour. I stood, picked up my coat, and smiled politely. "I need to head out." Daniel leaned back in his chair. "Another secret meeting." I met his eyes for the first time all evening. "No," I said softly. "Just somewhere I promised I'd be." Neither of us knew that before the night was over, his understanding of me and of leadership itself was about to change forever. The drive from my parents' house to the naval installation took just under 40 minutes, but my thoughts traveled much farther than the road beneath my tires. The spring sky had turned the deep blue that only appears after sunset, when the last trace of orange lingers at the horizon before giving way to night. I rolled the window down for a moment, letting the cool air clear my head. Daniel's words still echoed in my mind. "No one really cares about your Navy career." Oddly enough, they didn't hurt as much as they once would have. There was a time years earlier when I desperately wanted my family's approval. Every promotion, every difficult assignment, every commendation tucked away inside my personnel file carried a small private hope that one day my father would look at me with the same pride he reserved for Daniel. That hope had faded gradually, not because I stopped loving my family, but because I learned that chasing recognition is like chasing the horizon. No matter how far you walk, it always stays one step beyond your reach. The security checkpoint appeared around the bend. Floodlights illuminated the entrance, reflecting off polished concrete barriers and steel fencing. The young sailor standing guard recognized my vehicle before I even lowered the window. "Good evening, Admiral." His posture straightened instantly. "Good evening, Petty Officer." "Welcome back, ma'am." He scanned my identification with practiced efficiency, then smiled. "They've been looking forward to tonight. I hope I don't disappoint them." "You never do." The gate lifted. I continued inside, following familiar roads lined with neatly trimmed grass, administrative buildings, and rows of American flags that barely moved in the evening breeze. My phone buzzed again. "Commander Ellis, guests have started arriving. Everything is ready." I answered with a short reply. "On my way." Commander Nathan Ellis had been one of my executive officers years ago. Bright, disciplined, and relentlessly calm under pressure, he had become one of the finest leaders I'd ever worked with. Tonight's ceremony wasn't about me. It honored a new class of SEAL officers completing an advanced leadership program, and I had agreed months earlier to deliver the keynote address. The audience would include instructors, active duty operators, retired veterans, and families. To them, it was another important night in a lifetime of service. To me, it was simply another promise I intended to keep. As I parked outside the conference hall, I noticed a familiar black SUV slowing near the visitor parking lot. It looked strangely similar to Daniel's. I frowned. Probably coincidence. I stepped out, straightened my dark civilian blazer, and retrieved a slim garment bag from the back seat. Inside was my service dress uniform. I rarely wore it unless protocol required it. Every medal represented years that had never belonged entirely to me. Every ribbon reminded me of people who had sacrificed far more than I ever had. Inside the officers' lounge, Commander Ellis greeted me with his usual warm smile. "There you are." He extended his hand before abandoning formality and giving me a brief hug. "It's good to see you, Nathan. You look like you've been driving all day." "I have." He laughed. "Family. You guessed." "How bad?" I considered the question. "They're healthy." He grinned knowingly. I didn't ask if they were healthy. I couldn't help smiling. "They're still convinced I've spent the last decade buried under paperwork." Ellis shook his head. "They still don't know." "No. You ever think about telling them?" "I've thought about it. And it always felt unnecessary." He nodded slowly. "I suppose actions speak louder than explanations." "They usually do." He gestured toward the garment bag. "They're expecting Admiral Victoria Hale tonight, not Victoria the daughter." "I know." "And are you ready to be both?" That question lingered longer than either of us expected. "I'll manage." We walked into a preparation room where several senior officers were reviewing the evening schedule. Conversations paused briefly as I entered. "Good evening, Admiral." "Evening." One by one they greeted me with the quiet professionalism that defines military culture. No applause. No fanfare. Just mutual respect earned over years of shared responsibility. I changed into my service dress uniform. The navy blue jacket settled comfortably across my shoulders, familiar despite months since I'd last worn it. I adjusted the collar, fastened the final button, and checked the insignia one last time. Nothing about the uniform felt glamorous. People outside the military often imagined rank as prestige. Inside, the service rank usually felt heavier than the fabric carrying it. It meant every mistake became yours. Every success belonged to your people first. Ellis studied me for a moment. "You know," he said quietly, "there's a lieutenant graduating tonight who asked if you'd sign his father's old commissioning photo." "Oh, his father served under you 15 years ago." I blinked in surprise. "I barely remember names from that deployment." "He remembers yours." Before I could answer, another officer entered. "Ma'am, the guests are beginning to take their seats." "We'll be there shortly." As we started toward the hallway leading to the auditorium, Ellis glanced toward a security monitor mounted near the entrance. His expression changed. "What is it?" I asked. He pointed at the screen. Outside, a civilian family stood near the visitor reception desk, speaking with security personnel. Even from the grainy camera image, I recognized them immediately. Daniel, my father, my mother, Daniel's wife, 2 of my cousins. I stopped walking. "They followed me." Ellis looked at me carefully. "Do you want security to turn them away?" I thought about it for only a second. "No." "They're not on the guest list. They're my family. We can arrange temporary passes." "Please." He gave a quick nod and picked up a phone. Within minutes, the situation had been resolved. As we waited, I stood quietly beside the hallway window overlooking the entrance plaza. I watched my family receive visitor badges. Daniel appeared amused by the whole process. Even from a distance, I could tell he was joking with the guards. He probably assumed they treated every visitor this way. Dad looked around with open curiosity. Mom seemed uncomfortable. She never liked feeling out of place. A few minutes later, they disappeared inside the building. Ellis ended his call. "They've been seated in the guest section." "Thank you." "You realize this evening may answer questions they never thought to ask." "Maybe. And maybe it'll ask them a few." I exhaled slowly. "I didn't come here to prove anything." "I know. But sometimes the truth introduces itself." An announcement echoed softly through the backstage corridor. 5 minutes until commencement. The quiet hum of hundreds of conversations drifted through the walls from the auditorium beyond. Families were finding their seats. Young officers adjusted their uniforms. Veterans exchanged stories. Somewhere beyond those doors, my own family sat among them, still believing they had followed me to an ordinary meeting. Daniel probably expected to watch another dull military presentation before teasing me all the way back home. He had no reason to expect anything different. Neither did my father. I slipped my white gloves into my pocket, squared my shoulders, and looked toward the closed auditorium doors. Commander Ellis stepped beside me. "They're ready, Admiral." I gave one small nod. "So am I." On the other side of those doors, nearly every seat in the hall was occupied. My family sat halfway up the center section, scanning the stage with mild curiosity. Daniel leaned toward my father and whispered something that made him smile. Neither of them noticed the master of ceremonies walking toward the podium. Neither of them noticed the commander quietly taking his place near the entrance. And neither of them could possibly imagine what was about to happen the moment those doors opened. The double doors opened without ceremony. There was no dramatic music, no spotlight, no announcer trying to build suspense. Just the measured swing of polished oak doors and the quiet confidence that comes from a military event beginning exactly on schedule. Commander Nathan Ellis stepped through first. Conversations continued across the auditorium for another heartbeat. Then he stopped, turned toward the entrance, and called out in a clear, commanding voice that carried effortlessly through the hall. "Admiral on deck." The effect was instantaneous. More than 200 Navy SEALs instructors, senior officers, and candidates rose to their feet, as though connected by a single invisible thread. Chairs moved in perfect unison. Conversations ended in the same instant. Every head turned toward the doorway. The room fell into complete silence. Not the awkward silence of a family argument. The disciplined silence of respect. I stepped inside. I had walked into briefing rooms, command centers, and ceremony halls hundreds of times during my career. I never expected applause, and I certainly never expected admiration. Military customs were never about celebrating an individual. They existed to honor the office, the responsibility, and the chain of command that held thousands of people together under impossible circumstances. Still, I felt the weight of 200 pairs of eyes. I returned the salute. At ease. The room moved again as one. From halfway up the auditorium, I caught sight of my family. My father hadn't sat back down. His hand still rested on the arm of his chair as if he'd forgotten what to do next. My mother's lips had parted slightly, her eyes fixed on me with an expression I couldn't remember ever seeing before. Daniel remained standing, but not because he understood protocol. He simply looked frozen. His confident smile had disappeared. His eyes darted across the room, searching for someone else. Surely he thought they must have been greeting another admiral. Someone important. Someone older. Someone other than his little sister. Commander Ellis stepped to the podium. "Please be seated." The audience settled. He adjusted the microphone but didn't immediately begin reading from his prepared remarks. Instead, he looked across the audience with the calm confidence of someone speaking to professionals who understood the meaning of every word. "Good evening. Tonight we recognize exceptional officers completing one of the most demanding leadership programs in the United States Navy." His voice filled the hall naturally. "You have spent months sharpening tactical skills, but tactics alone do not create leaders. Character does." Several graduating officers nodded almost instinctively. Ellis continued. "Leadership isn't measured by volume. It isn't measured by ego. And it certainly isn't measured by how often someone tells you they're important." A few quiet smiles spread through the audience. "It is measured by the people willing to follow you when the outcome is uncertain." He turned toward me. Tonight's keynote speaker has spent more than 3 decades proving exactly that. A large screen behind the stage illuminated, not with dramatic music or patriotic graphics, simply my name, Rear Admiral Victoria Hale. Beneath it appeared the words, 33 years of service. Then photographs began to appear, not glamorous portraits. Working photographs. One showed me standing beside a helicopter on a rain-soaked flight deck, hair whipped across my face by rotor wash. Another captured a briefing room crowded with maps, laptops, and exhausted officers. Another showed me kneeling beside a young sailor whose arm was in a sling, both of us laughing at something the photographer had failed to capture. No classified locations. No operational details. Just moments from a career spent beside other people. Ellis never exaggerated. He never mentioned secret missions. Instead, he spoke about leadership. Those who have served with Admiral Hale know one thing above all else. He paused. If something went wrong, she never asked who should be blamed. He looked toward the graduating officers. She asked who needed help. The room remained perfectly still. Over 33 years, she has mentored hundreds of officers. Many now command ships, aviation squadrons, special operations units, and training commands around the world. He smiled. Several of them are sitting in this room tonight. Hands began to clap. The applause started softly. It grew gradually, not into a standing ovation because military audiences rarely behaved that way during introductions, but into something deeper. Recognition. Professional respect. When the applause faded, Ellis stepped away from the podium. "Ma'am?" I approached the microphone. For a moment I didn't speak, not because I was nervous, Because I was looking at faces. Some belonged to officers I'd known as nervous ensigns. Others belonged to seasoned chiefs whose advice had saved me more times than I could count. Near the back sat Gold Star parents, retired operators, young families holding sleeping babies wrapped in tiny American flags. This night belonged to all of them. "Thank you, Commander Ellis." I smiled faintly. "He has a bad habit," a few people chuckled. "He always makes me sound far more impressive than I actually am." Laughter spread across the room. "It keeps morale up," Ellis answered from the side of the stage. "It certainly raises expectations." The audience relaxed. I preferred it that way. People listened better when they felt they were part of a conversation rather than a performance. When I was a brand new officer, I believed leadership meant always having the right answer. I shook my head. I was wrong. Silence settled again. The best leaders I've ever known weren't the smartest people in the room. I glanced across the graduating class. They were the first to admit they didn't know everything. Several instructors exchanged knowing smiles. They listened before they spoke. I paused. They accepted responsibility before accepting praise. I saw Daniel still watching me. His expression had changed again. Not disbelief anymore. Confusion. As though he were trying to reconcile two completely different versions of the same person. The sister who quietly endured family jokes. And the officer every person in this auditorium seemed to trust. "I've served with extraordinary sailors," I continued. "I've watched 19-year-olds display courage that people twice their age could only hope to possess." I let the words settle. "And I've learned something from every single one of them." The speech lasted barely 20 minutes. There were no dramatic stories. No classified heroics. No self-congratulation. Instead, I spoke about humility, accountability, and the responsibility that comes with earning another person's trust. When I finished, the applause felt warm rather than loud. As I stepped away from the podium, the graduates rose one row at a time, not because protocol required it, but because they wanted to shake hands before leaving for the reception. A lieutenant approached first. "Ma'am, you probably don't remember me." I smiled. "I've reached the age where that's becoming increasingly likely." He laughed. "My father served under you aboard the Hamilton." His eyes softened. "He passed away 4 years ago." "I'm sorry." "He always said the best lesson you ever taught him had nothing to do with tactics." "What was that?" The young officer smiled. "Take care of your people and they'll take care of the mission." For a moment I couldn't answer. Then I simply squeezed his hand. I'm glad he remembered. I never forgot it either. Behind him stood dozens more, each waiting patiently, each carrying a story. And across the room, my family watched every conversation unfold, realizing that everything they thought they knew about my career had been built on assumptions instead of questions. The reception after the ceremony was held in a long hall just beyond the auditorium, a room with polished floors, framed naval photographs, and tall windows reflecting the soft glow of evening lights outside. People moved in careful clusters, uniforms blending with dark suits and dresses, conversations low and respectful. There was coffee, iced tea, small plates of food, and the steady hum of people who had shared enough hard years to speak without wasting words. I had barely stepped into the room before the first group approached. A retired Master Chief came toward me with a cane in one hand and a grin that made him look 20 years younger. "Admiral Hale," he said. "Master Chief Rowland." His grin widened. "You remembered?" I'd be foolish not to. He shook my hand with both of his. His grip was weaker than it used to be, but the warmth in it remained the same. "You kept half my boys alive because you knew when to listen to a chief." "I remember it the other way around," I said. "You kept me from making young officer mistakes." He laughed. "You made plenty. That's why I needed you." Behind him, 2 younger SEALs exchanged a smile. They were watching the kind of conversation that never appeared in speeches or official biographies. The military is full of those invisible threads, old lessons, old trust, old debts that nobody writes down but everyone remembers. Across the room I saw Daniel standing beside my father. They hadn't moved much since entering the reception. My mother held a small cup of coffee with both hands, though she had not taken a sip. She kept looking at me then, at the officers around me, as though trying to solve a puzzle she hadn't known existed. Daniel looked uncomfortable for the first time all evening. Not angry. Not yet. Just displaced. In our family he had always known where to stand. Near the center, near the loudest laugh, near Dad's approving gaze. Here the room had arranged itself around rules he didn't understand. Nobody asked about his companies. Nobody leaned in when he spoke. Nobody knew he was the successful son. They knew me, and he had no idea what to do with that. Commander Ellis returned with a young lieutenant at his side. "Ma'am, this is Lieutenant Aaron Pike." The lieutenant stood stiffly, clearly trying to remain composed. "Admiral, it's an honor." "Congratulations, Lieutenant." "Thank you, ma'am." He hesitated. Ellis gave him a small nod. "My mother wanted to meet you tonight," Pike said. "She couldn't travel because of her health, but she asked me to tell you something." I waited. "She said when my dad came home from deployment, he talked about you for years. He said you never forgot the names of the men under your command." His throat tightened just enough that I noticed. "He said you made people feel like they mattered even when everything around them felt dangerous." I felt the familiar ache behind my ribs. Not sadness exactly. Something quieter. The knowledge that a career is never made of titles. It is made of moments you rarely know anyone remembers. "Your father was a good man," I said. Pike nodded quickly, blinking once. "Yes, ma'am." When he stepped away, I turned and found my father standing only a few feet behind me. He had approached so quietly I hadn't heard him. For a second, neither of us spoke. Up close, he looked older than he had at dinner. Not physically. Something in his confidence had shifted, as if the ground beneath a familiar house had moved an inch. "Victoria," he said. "Dad." He glanced toward the room. "All these people know you." "Some of them." His eyes returned to mine. "They respect you." I didn't answer immediately. Respect is a difficult word when it comes from someone whose respect you have spent half a life wanting and pretending not to want. "They respect the uniform," I said. He shook his head. "No, I saw how they looked at you." I folded my hands loosely in front of me. "They're good people." Dad gave a short, almost helpless laugh. "That commander said you mentored hundreds of officers." "I suppose that's true." "You suppose—" "I never counted." He looked away. For the first time I saw embarrassment cross his face. "I didn't know." The sentence was small, almost too small for 33 years of misunderstanding. But I heard what sat underneath it. I didn't ask. I didn't try. "I let your brother explain you to me." Before I could respond, Daniel appeared beside him. His jaw was tight. "Well," he said, forcing a laugh, "this is quite the production." Dad looked at him sharply. "Daniel, what I'm saying, it's impressive." But the tone wasn't admiration. It was defense dressed as humor. Daniel looked at me. "Guess you never mentioned you were a big deal." "I'm not a big deal." He gestured around the room. "Come on, Vicky." 200 guys jumped up like the president walked in. "They stood for rank and protocol." "They stood for you." The words came out harder than he intended. A nearby captain glanced over, then politely moved away, giving us privacy. Daniel noticed and flushed. For a moment I saw the boy he used to be, the one who couldn't stand losing a board game, who would rather quit than admit someone else had played better. "I didn't bring you here to embarrass you," I said quietly. He scoffed. "You didn't bring us at all, we followed you." "That's true." He looked toward Dad, then back at me. "So what was the plan? Let us sit there and feel stupid?" "No." "Then why let us in?" "Because you're my family." That stopped him. Only for a second. Then he shook his head. "You could have told us." "I could have told you many things." "Then why didn't you—" The room seemed to fade at the edges. All those years came back in small fragments. Thanksgiving dinners where Daniel joked about my government pension. Christmas mornings when Dad asked him detailed questions about contracts, then asked me if I was still stationed somewhere around D.C. Phone calls where Mom said, "Your father doesn't understand what you do." As if that explained everything. I kept my voice calm. "Because every time I came home, the story had already been written." Daniel's face changed. I continued. "You decided I had spent my life taking orders. Dad decided I worked behind a desk. Everyone decided my silence meant there was nothing worth asking about." Dad lowered his eyes. Daniel opened his mouth, then closed it again. "I didn't need applause," I said. "But I would have liked curiosity. That landed harder than anger would have." My mother stepped forward, then her coffee forgotten on a nearby table. "Oh, honey?" Her voice trembled, but I didn't move toward comfort yet. Not because I wanted to punish her. Because for once I needed the truth to stand in the room without being softened too quickly. She touched my sleeve. I should have asked more. I looked at her hand, then at her face. "You were busy holding everyone together." "That's not an excuse." "No," I said. "But it's true." Daniel's shoulders dropped slightly. The fight in him had nowhere useful to go. A group of young SEALs passed behind us, and all three of them gave a respectful nod. "Good evening, Admiral." "Evening, gentlemen." They moved on. Daniel watched them go. The silence afterward felt different. Not empty. Full. Finally, my father cleared his throat. At dinner, he said, looking at Daniel but speaking to me, what he said was wrong. Daniel stared at the floor. Dad turned fully toward him. It was cruel. Daniel's face reddened. I was joking. No, Dad said quietly. You were doing what I've let you do for years. The room around us continued humming, but our family had become its own small island. Daniel looked genuinely struck. Dad turned back to me, and I laughed along too many times. There was no grand apology, no dramatic tears. Just an old man proud and stubborn finally seeing the shape of something he had helped build. I am sorry, Victoria. I nodded once. Thank you. Daniel swallowed. For a long moment I thought he would walk away. Instead he looked at me with a tired honesty I had rarely seen in him. I don't know how to be the little person in a room, he said. The confession surprised all of us. He gave a bitter half-smile. I've spent my whole life making sure I wasn't. I studied him. For the first time that night he wasn't performing. I never wanted you to be little, I said. He glanced around the reception hall. Sure feels that way. Then maybe this is good for you. A short laugh escaped him despite himself. Still sharp, huh? Always. He nodded slowly, then looked me in the eye. I'm sorry for what I said. I accepted it not because it erased the years, but because apology is sometimes the first honest thing a person offers after running out of excuses. Thank you, Daniel. He breathed out, almost relieved. From the front of the hall, Commander Ellis signaled that the formal photographs were about to begin. I turned to my family. I need to go for a few minutes. Dad straightened as if he suddenly didn't want to look careless in this place. Of course. As I walked away, I heard him speak softly to my mother. Our daughter. Just those two words. But after all those years, they sounded different. Not like possession, like discovery. And behind me, for once, Daniel did not make a joke. The formal photographs ended nearly an hour later. Rows of newly graduated officers posed with their families, instructors, and teammates. Laughter mixed with quiet conversations as cameras flashed across the reception hall. Every photograph captured more than uniforms and medals. They captured years of sacrifice that rarely appeared in public. I had just finished congratulating the final group when Commander Ellis walked over carrying 2 paper cups of coffee. I figured you could use this. You know me too well. He handed me one. So, he said with a knowing smile, how's your evening going? I looked toward the far side of the room where my parents and Daniel stood together. Different than I expected. In a good way. I think it's too early to tell. Ellis nodded. Families don't change in a single conversation. No, but sometimes they begin changing in one. He was right. Leadership had taught me many things over the years, but perhaps the hardest lesson was that lasting change rarely arrived all at once. It came quietly, one decision at a time, one honest conversation after another. When the reception began to wind down, my parents waited for me outside the building. The night air had cooled considerably. The flags lining the walkway moved gently in the breeze beneath the lights. For a moment, none of us spoke. My father finally broke the silence. I've been thinking. I smiled faintly. That usually means something important is coming. He managed a tired laugh. You always did know me. He looked across the parade grounds before speaking again. When you were little, I used to tell everyone Daniel would take over my business. You did. I spent years planning for his future. He paused. But I never stopped to ask what kind of future you wanted. I listened quietly. I thought providing for my family meant understanding them. His voice grew softer. Tonight I realized those aren't the same thing. The words settled between us. Not dramatic, not polished, just honest. I don't blame you for everything, I said. I know. We all make assumptions. But I made too many. He looked at me. And I let those assumptions become your identity in my mind. Before I could answer, my mother slipped her arm through mine. You know what bothered me the most tonight? What? I realized I don't even know half the places you've lived. I smiled sadly. Neither do I sometimes. She laughed through damp eyes. No, I mean it. She squeezed my arm gently. I know Daniel's business partners. I know his favorite restaurants. I know what truck he wants to buy next. Then she looked directly at me. I don't know your favorite place in the world. I hadn't expected that question. I thought about it. After 33 years of deployments, ports, and commands, countless places came to mind. Finally, I answered. Home. She frowned slightly. This? I shook my head. No. I looked at both of my parents. Any place where I don't have to explain who I am. My mother quietly wiped a tear away. Dad looked down at the pavement. I hope one day this can be that place. I hope so too. A car door closed behind us. Daniel had been standing several yards away giving us space. He walked over slowly. His usual confidence had disappeared. Not broken, simply quieter. I owe you something besides an apology. I waited. When we were kids, he began, I always thought you were trying to compete with me. I wasn't. I know that now. He gave a small embarrassed smile. I think I was competing with someone who never entered the race. That earned the first genuine laugh either of us had shared in years. You finally figured it out. Took me long enough. He rubbed the back of his neck. You know what hit me the hardest? What? Nobody in there cared how much money I make, I smiled. They were interested in different things. They cared about trust. Yes. They cared about character. Yes. They cared about whether people would follow someone into difficult situations. I nodded. They do. Daniel looked toward the brightly lit building one last time. I've spent years trying to impress people. He sighed. You spent years trying to serve them. Neither of us spoke for several seconds. Then he extended his hand. I'd like to start over. Instead of shaking it, I stepped forward and hugged him. It wasn't a perfect ending. Too many birthdays, holidays, and careless words stood behind us for everything to disappear overnight. But forgiveness isn't pretending the past never happened. It's deciding the past doesn't get to decide tomorrow. As we pulled apart, Dad smiled. Well, he said, clearing his throat, your mother insisted we all have breakfast together tomorrow. Mom looked surprised. I did. You do now, she laughed. I suppose I do. Daniel grinned. I'll buy. I raised an eyebrow. That's generous. It's the least I can do. We walked toward the parking lot together. No one rushed ahead. No one tried to be the center of attention. For the first time in years, we simply walked as a family. Before getting into my car, I turned back toward the entrance of the hall. Several young SEAL officers were leaving after saying goodbye to their instructors. The moment they noticed me, they stopped. One of them called quietly, "Good night, Admiral." The others straightened instinctively. I returned the salute. Take care of each other. Yes, ma'am. They continued into the night, talking and laughing, carrying with them careers that were only beginning. I watched them for a moment before climbing into my car. As I started the engine, I caught my reflection in the windshield. The same face, the same woman. Nothing about me had changed that evening. The only thing that had changed was that my family had finally seen the person I had been all along. For years, I believed respect had to be earned one mission, one promotion, one difficult decision at a time. I still believe that. But I also learned something else. Sometimes the hardest place to earn understanding isn't in the military. It's around your own family's dinner table. If this story reminded you of someone whose quiet sacrifices went unnoticed, I hope you'll reach out to them while you still can. Sometimes a sincere question means more than years of assumptions. I'd love to hear your thoughts, so leave a comment below and tell me where you're watching from. And if stories about family resilience and second chances speak to you, consider subscribing so we can continue sharing journeys like this together.